Hello, my name is Joe Cartwright and welcome to my studio. Today's subject is a Venice canal scene. However, what you learn from this video you can apply not just to any other street scene, but probably to any other watercolour painting. In this video I'll teach you how to capture the atmosphere of this location and also how to create all the different textures that are so typical of Venice. So let's get started. Let that sit there for a minute. Let's have a look at our colours. My basic process for a subject like this is to look at the photo and I go, okay, what are the lightest tones? So the lightest tones are in the sky and on this brickwork and the tops of the boats. So my initial underpainting stage will focus on that. Some weak cad orange, a little bit of permanent rose. Some cobalt blue as well. Look how much water I've got there, just really sloshing it around because it's a very pale sky. I'll just wet this some more. I need a bit of pink in the bottom part of this painting. Into blue up here, just a touch. If we have a look at our reference, this side is in shade, whereas this side is in sunlight. So I'll drop in some cool colours on this side. Cool meaning with a bit of blue in them. That's a warmer colours here. So what I did is I went in with some of the blue mix up here, then some of this warmer brownish orange mix, and then a bit of the pink. And that's it. I'm using a size 24 brush just to get it down. I'm not worrying about clouds or anything like that. It's going to dry very, very light. Right now it sort of looks quite a bit darker because you're comparing it to the white paper, but it's going to dry much lighter than that. Then into here I'm going to get some of this weak blue. Blue-grey, it's not a pure blue. All I'm doing here is the lightest tones. Now we'll warm it up a little bit on this side. into whatever was left on that palette, a bit more water, and I'm just picking up a little bit of this raw umber. I don't want it to be too strong. Remember, in the painting, this is all very light. Just paint through the figure. And I'll use the same mix over here. That's good. And I'm not doing anything with the water because while this is wet, if I put any water in, it's just going to run down. We'll leave that till the end. Oops, way too much. Now, I'm just picking up some earth colours. Just taking this opportunity to start creating some texture. We'll do more of this later. And while this is wet, I'm now going to look at the buildings. Like we've got a building here with lots of pinks and that on it. Now, I'm painting this without a lot of paint in my brush because I don't want the windows to go red on me. And I'm just using a size 8 brush here. By having a small brush, I can control just how far the paint will flow because I won't have a lot of paint in my brush. Whereas if I tried to paint this with a size 24 brush, all the whites would disappear in my painting. You can see here, I want this to be a bit lighter. There's some separation there. So even though I've painting this on as a wet on wet technique by controlling how much paint's in my brush, I can control just how far some of this paint flows down the paper. Bit of raw sienna for this building. So I'm painting the lightest tone. So I've just put some of this dirty brown colour on that roof. And what I'm painting there, I'm painting these light passages with this first wash. That's really what I'm painting. Just realised this here, this shape here should have been there. So I can either just ignore it, which is what I think I'll do, or I could have just made the doorway a bit bigger. There's a bit of brown here on the side of this wall. And then this one's just a weaker mix of the red. That's the underpainting stage. So now I'm going to give a little bit more thought to the colours. We're not going to be using any pure colours. They're all going to be muted. And we're going to have more detail in the foreground, getting lighter and softer and bluer and duller into the distance. So we're going to have a dull brown, some of this reddish colour, and a beige, some orange. This first building is just some raw umber. I don't want this big brush. But that's a bit too bright, so I'm going to add just a little bit of cobalt blue. And this bit of permanent rose. So the permanent rose is really just to cancel some of the green that appeared in that. And I'm going to throw in some raw sienna. And that's good. And then here we'll have this reddish colour. Just some burnt sienna, a little bit of permanent rose, a little bit of cobalt blue. I don't want this red to be too strong because I don't want this building to jump at us too much. Then we've got a duller orange building here. And that will do for that. And I'm just going to mix a puddle of like dirty cobalt blue here. And I'll use that to adjust some of these colours as I'm painting along. All right, I'll just start with this building. Later we'll do more work on lower down on the building where it connects to the water. And then there's some dirty brown, put some of that in. Pick up some French ultramarine. Again, this is where it becomes really difficult for me to give you every colour, because already this colour is a mixture of 4 other colours. I'm dropping in some of this darker discoloration on the mortar, just so it's not just a flat shape. We don't want to end up looking like we're painting the wall of a house or something like that. Just to break that up a bit. That will do. And then we've got this shape here. Let's paint this first. The front is the same colour as that, but with just a lighter tone. So I'll just drag the brush down there. I need more area in my palette, so I'm just going to get rid of this. I didn't need that much anyway. And I'm just going to mix a little puddle of French ultramarine and burnt sienna. Now, sometimes I'm happy to have colour bleed into my painting, other times not so much. It really depends on whether it looks good and what I'm creating. Later we're going to add a bit of green down here, so it doesn't have to be too accurate. The lines there were just a bit too stark. We just got one set of louvers there. I'll just grab a little bit of some cobalt turquoise, raw umber, French ultramarine. And I'm just leaving a little bit of white there. I don't particularly want this colour to bleed into there. If it bleeds into this area, no problem, because it would be casting some reflected light. But I don't want it bleeding into here. A little bit doesn't matter. Left this a little bit late. What I like to do while the paper is still a bit damp, I'll mix up some thicker paint. I'll get a size 8 brush. And I'll just mix some French ultramarine and burnt sienna, leaning it a little bit to the blue. Just a quick dry brush stroke. The idea is some of the paint, these ones here, because they're quite narrow shapes, some of it may bleed into the side, which is fine, but I also leave the odd little bit of dry paper. So let's go in and have a look. So it's just that little quick stroke like here, it just gives the illusion of reflections on the windows. And quite often you'll see discoloration under the window sills, something like this. So quite often I'll get my brush and just do what I did there, where I run it underneath Oops, don't want too much of that running down. That's good enough. I'm trying to protect a little bit of a highlight along the railing here. So you can see I very loosely painted around the window shapes, and then I go in and drop some of this darker colour. Now here we've got lots of detail. By the time I get to here, I start putting in less and less detail. Just going to lighten this a little bit. And you can see in this puddle here, I'm just using a bit of cobalt blue just to add a bit more blue to the grey I've got here, because objects in the distance are going to become a bit bluer. So I just look at what I've got there and adjust it rather than start from scratch. I had just a pencil mark that was sticking out from the side, and I thought, oh, I'll just paint over it. But really it makes the dome look too big, so I'll fix that pencil mark later. Notice how often I pick up more water when I want to dilute some of this paint. Notice I'm not painting all the way down, I'm just dropping in the odd little hint of colour, because when I go in and paint the bridge, I want some of the greenish colour of the bridge to show through as a pure colour rather than be mixed with the colours of the back. More French ultramarine and burnt sienna. And I quite often let my colours just flow into one another. This area is still a bit too wet for me to go in and put in some more windows. Now you'll notice I've left that sitting there. I'm just letting some of that paint settle into the paper, and later I'm going to come in with just a small amount of water on my brush and just let some of that paint flow down, but it'll leave a hint of some glass there or something like that. That's the idea. It's too dark. Later when this is dry, I've got to go in and put in the shadow shapes. When that dries, I'm going to put a bit of a glaze over it just to give it some more colour. I think it needs something like this, but a lighter version of it. Now I'll go back here, so clean my brush. In fact, I'm going to darken all the white. And then later I'm going to put a shadow over that wall. Now, those darks are looking very strong at the moment, but when I paint over them later, they'll lighten. I'm going to tone this down a little bit, right? Because I just want the viewer to think, oh yeah, there's bricks, but I don't want them to focus on this area. This is more something that leads into the painting. So all I'm going to do for that is just get some clean water and I'm purposefully going to just soften some of those edges. And as long as I do it with lots of water, it won't go muddy, it will just dull them a bit. And the other thing too, those bricks have a little bit more red in them, and I like that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get some Scarlet Lake, some burnt sienna. That's better. And this will do two things. One, it will further kill off some of that dark, but also warm this area up a bit, so it will bring this area forward just a fraction. So I'll let that sit there. Let's do some work on the figures and the bridge now. I can't do the water until I've done the bridge to some extent because there's a bit of a reflection here. So let's work on that. I'm not going to worry about the path either at this stage. So for the figures, we've got this red, we can build on that for the flesh tones. Just some raw umber, a little bit of Scarlet Lake. If you just squint at this, you'll see how much stronger in tone these figures are than the buildings in the distance, right? So that gives you an idea of how thick you've got to make your paint. These figures way over here, again, their tones are going to be a lot lighter. So all I did is, I've already used some of the paint in the brush. I've just added some water to it, and I'll use that on some of these faces. And there's someone there with a violet top. I might put her in now. Very weak. And I've got this grey colour that was developed from all the different paints that have been here. So anything I mix in it is already going to be greyed. So I thought I'll give someone a blue top. So I've just grabbed some of this cobalt blue and mixed it in with this grey that's already there, and that just automatically greys that colour. Now I don't want to give them long legs because they're being cut off by this platform here. And that'll do, with just a hint of these figures. These ones we have to spend a bit more time on because they're closer to us. And then get a darker colour for some of their hair. I don't want to spend too much time on this figure here because we've still got to put all the railings in and all that. So you can see how these figures are now jumping forward. These figures have some light on them, so I'll lift some of that colour. Okay, now while this is wet, I'll get some French ultramarine, a little bit of burnt sienna. Drop some of that in. And this is basically just a discoloration that's all over the bridge. Be an extra shadow underneath here. Now, if you had painted the whole thing and forgot to put in this wet on wet discoloration, all you do is wait till it dried, re-wet that area, then go in and drop in some of that colour. Good. Let's work on this figure. She's got a blue-grey top. She's got light brown hair, so I'll just get some raw sienna. Now I'm looking at this figure and I've just realised she's too short. And sometimes it's quicker just to do a quick adjustment. And this is where it helps being able to draw reasonably well. You can make adjustments on the fly. But now, instead of giving her light trousers, so if you look at the photo, her trousers are a little bit lighter than her top. I'm going to go the other way because I've got all these pencil marks I need to camouflage. Go back in and put in some of these shadows. Just lifting a little bit of a highlight on this side. Same with her hair. The only problem I have here is I've got a pencil mark running through her head. I should have erased that before I painted. I'm going to go in with some stronger mix. This time I'm just using some raw sienna and burnt sienna in the mixture. So the bridge to me has just a slight greenish tint to it, but it's not a bright green, so I'll into this dull browny mix I've got here, I'll add some cobalt turquoise. some French ultramarine, a little bit of curry olive, and obviously this is way too bright, so then I'll get some burnt sienna, and that will dull that green. So we check that colour, and that's pretty good. I'm not drawing a regular pattern, just squiggles. But there's got to be enough there that I'm also camouflaging the lighter space behind them. I'm going to put a shadow over that now. For a shadow colour, I'm going to mix some French ultramarine, a little bit of permanent rose, a bit of this greenish colour. What I'm doing there is the water is a green colour, so some of that would be reflecting up to it. So I just picked some of this up and put it into there. These posts come down to that edge. And there's still some even darker shadows underneath this bridge, but I have to wait for that to dry before I do anything else. When you get something like this, where I've left a pale passage, I just mix a colour as close as I can to the colour that's in the distance. It can be a little bit brighter because remember it's going to dull, but I make sure I don't have too much paint in my brush, otherwise it'll be hard to fill that gap and nothing else. All right, let's work on these bones. Let that sit there. Gondolas are black, so for that I'll just use some French ultramarine and burnt sienna. This side of the gondola, even though it's away from the light, is picking up a lot of reflected light. So I'm just going to lift some of that colour while it's wet. It's like a green tarp on this boat. And there's some other marks. Just some quick dry brush strokes, just a hint at some shapes. But we don't need to spend time trying to make them look like anything special. Now I'll pick up some quite thick Scarlet Lake, maybe a little bit of this blue just to dull it a fraction. Went in a little bit too soon there and the paint was running down more than I wanted. This is where it would have made more sense to have painted some of these shapes while I had the colour there. So now I've got to just match some of the colours. And there's some shapes down here. These will have a bit more of a shadow closer to the ground. And I'm just hinting at doors or other shapes. All right, I'm going to go and dry that very quickly because I find I'm sticking my finger into wet paint. Some French ultramarine, a little bit of permanent rose and a hint of burnt sienna for my shadow. Underneath this part of the bridge is a darker section there, and there's a slightly darker section here. So for that, I'll get some of the shadow colour and add a little bit of burnt sienna, maybe a bit more French ultramarine to it. Just enough to indicate what's there. And I'm going to put a little decoration on this bridge. Alright, I've got to dry that again because I've got to put those bollards in. I'm going to lift the left-hand side, just some of that colour. Now you can see how that light from the path is quite useful. Okay, that's done. Let's take a moment to put this light up here in. Right, now we've got some detail here. I don't want to add any more detail there until I do the water. Let me try that again. Now I put a little bit of this shadow colour there and thought it's not quite strong enough, so just add a bit more paint. light coloured shoes. She's got now the shoe that touches the ground will have a shadow running up to it, but the shoe that's not quite touching the ground, there'll be a gap between the shadow and the shoe. That'll do. Don't try to make it too special. The base of the shoes is a slightly darker spot, so just picked up some French ultramarine and burnt sienna. I'm just going to drop some of that there. Quite often where a vertical shape hits the ground, you'll get a dark area. So let's have a look at this. First thing that stands out is I've gone very light here, whereas in the reference it's quite a bit darker, and I don't really want it that light. Let's mix some burnt sienna, tiny bit of Scarlet Lake. I want to just increase the tone of this before I do the shadow over it. I'll now add some detail to the shutters. Just any dull grey, green colour will do. Just quick dry brush strokes just to give it a bit of character. There's still little details here, but I can do that after. Let me just get the shadows sorted out. I'm going to mix a lot of shadow colour. So again, French ultramarine. A little bit of permanent rose. A little bit of burnt sienna. And while that looks quite strong, if we test it on a piece of paper, that's the actual colour. I'm going to add some more burnt sienna. only because there's not a lot of blue in the sky. I'm using a lighter mix for the shadow colour for the distant objects, so your stronger shadows are going to be in the foreground. I've got to be careful I don't create shapes that are just too sharp. I still want a little bit of a feel of some softness in the distance. So I'll just soften that edge. This one's fine because it's pretty close. This is quite a light building, but it will have shadows underneath some of these shapes. Now these marks are standing out a bit too much, so I'll just soften them with a bit of the shadow colour. I'm going to darken this, and depending on how dark or light yours is here, you may not need to darken it as much. A bit too strong. Let's get some water. And here we've got this shadow that runs across here. And then within the window, as you get further in, it's a bit darker on the top corner. Something like that. And here, Just trying to add a little bit of texture here without going over the top. Have to watch out for these little shapes where the paint is pooling. It's very easy to end up with a cauliflower there. You can see all the light we have here. Now there's texture on this path. It's a dull brown. Let's just add a bit of blue into this reddish brown that I had here. And then they can just disappear into the distance. I made sure I didn't try and create a real regular pattern. There's another shadow that should go along here. Now I can do the water. Most of these reflections are very light. If we look at our reference, you can see the reflections of the buildings are quite light. There's hints of colour for the boats and that, so I'll just keep that in mind. Just lifting a little highlight. You can see a dark reflection of the underside of the bridge in the water. Quite often there's a darker area where the boat meets the water, so we'll just put a little dark line there. And I'm just trying to catch the feel for this scene without going into too much little finicky detail. All right, let me dry this. There's just too many wet areas. Your dry brush strokes are a great tool for putting in shapes when you're not sure what is actually there. That's pretty good. Just hinting at some of these creases. Okay, I'm just going to put a bit of gouache on her head to retrieve a little highlight. You know, I'm going to make her stronger in tone. It's better. I wanted this figure to be stronger in tone than these figures on the bridge, just to help lead the eye into the painting a bit better. Okay, that's finished. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a like, and if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please do so. It helps me out a lot. And if you're able, please consider supporting me on Patreon. I look forward to seeing you for the next one.